Now we're going to build the same bit of code, the hello world code, but we're going to broaden the process a little bit. When you're doing software design, normally you have some sort of process to build complicated software systems. We're going to keep our process rather simple for a system for our code, because our code is only small individual programs. And we're going to have a three-step process: design, what we're going to do, and I'm going to take you through some of the design process here. We're going to build it just as we did in the previous video, using Visual Studio IDE and using C# code. And then we're going to test our code and make sure it works. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to my documents folder. I'm going to set up a new folder for my project. I just kind of call this the Hello World project folder, okay? And you can see there that's in my documents folder, and then underneath here I'm going to put in 3 subfolders. So the first folder is going to, I'm just going to number these. So I'm going to design, any design related documents are going to be in here. Then I'm going to have a new folder here for the build documents. Then finally I'm going to right click again and create a new folder for the testing related stuff. So again, you can see those 3 steps: design, build and test. Right, we're ready to go ahead with our design process. The first part of our design we're going to look at is called a use case table, which describes the set of interactions between the actor or the user and the computer system itself in our code. So we're just going to do that for our Hello World program, and the first step in the success scenario here is that a message is output to the screen, sorry, to console, and then that's the console.write line, and then the read line command allows user to input. And all we did in our example there the last time was we hit the enter key and that exited the program straight away for us. That's the only 2 steps here that we're going to have, and there's no exceptions. There's no nothing that's going to throw up an error here possibly, so we'll leave that blank for now. That's something we'll cover in future use case tables or use case scenarios. This you'll see later on is going to come into our testing. So we'll explore this use case table to generate use cases later on and to test our program. Inside the documents folder, where I've set up my Hello World project folder inside the design folder, I'm going to save my use case table inside there as is part of the design documentation. Another part of design documentation is the diagram that's going to be used to describe the workflow. I'm going to use a universal modeling language diagram called an activity diagram, very similar to flowcharts that might be used to describe workflow or processes, to describe the workflow here in our program. So if I go to this website draw.io, it's a very useful utility there. It's an online utility there for drawing diagrams. I can just click through and set up my diagram. I'll just call this Hello World UML activity diagram. Okay, so I'll rename that. Then I'm going to scroll down here on the left hand side on the draw.io utility. All this works from the browser, so you don't need to install anything, very handy. And I'm going to pick the UML section here and look at the UML symbols that are available to me. And the one that I'm going to a few symbols I'm going to use today, I'm going to continue using this for the design process throughout this tutorial series, and you'll see more symbols appear as we create new logic in our programs. So I'm just going to pull over the start here to indicate the start of the flow of logic, and then the next item I'm just going to create a regular box there. The next item, and in there this is the output message. Then I'll just drag another object box over here for wait for user input. And I'll connect those two boxes together by grabbing a connection up here. Point my arrow there at the box, and where the green dot appears, I just click and drag and connect to the next box. And then finally I look for an end process here, so if I keep scrolling I should find an end. There we go. And we'll grab a connector there to connect to the end. Okay, that's the start of my process. Then I hit the enter key twice here, and okay, we're at the end of our process here. Okay, so this activity diagram, you can save this now into my folder by just hitting the file, export as, I'm going to save this as a PDF, and export. You can save it out on your cloud services there, as you can see, and I'm just going to download this. When I click the download option, I'll save as, browse to my documents, Hello World project, my design folder, pop it in there with my UML stuff. Finished with our design process, it's time to get building or creating code. Back into Visual Studio here, you can see there's a couple of ways you can start a new project. You can use the menu up here, or you can use the button down here. So I'm just going to click here to kick off a new project. Okay, and within the templates here, we'll just ensure that Visual C# is chosen. And we're going to go with console application again. So just make sure the right type of project is chosen here. I'm going to give this a name here. We're going to call this Hello World 2. And the location here we're going to change, because if you remember we set up some folders here for our work here on this project. And in our documents folder you can see I'll browse to my Hello World project and go to my build folder, and I'll pop the project in there. And the project folder, when I click OK, will be set up in there with all the relevant code files. Okay, now it's a case of typing in the same codes as the previous project from the previous video about how to write your first program in C#. And if you haven't seen that, it might be worth reviewing it. I'll put a link up there in a card in the top right hand corner of the screen here that you can check out. And you might pause at certain points here just to review. Can you remember the important points of the last video? For example, can you remember where to start the code? So the code of course starts in here, in between the braces of the main method. Okay. Might be worth asking yourself now as well, can you remember how to write the console.write line and console.read line commands that were used in the program in the previous video? So give it a go yourself and see does it match what I do. Okay, so I'm going to start with the console.write line. Making sure I have a capital W, capital L, then create a set of brackets, and of course my set of code marks for my string literal hello world go in there. That will be passed out to the console, and finish my line of course with semicolon. You'll notice when I put the semicolon in to finish the line that Visual Studio does something really clever here. It indents the code here. So that it's very clear that that code is part of this code block for the main method. Okay, I'm going to move on. Even if you try and trick it, for example, like moving out and starting my code here for the console.read line, when I put my semicolon in again, Visual Studio does its trick and creates indentation for you. So the braces here actually represent, what they represent in code is a code block. Let's start reading through the code here. As I read through it, you'll notice there's a very handy color coding that's available, as well as the indentation. There's a nice color coded feature here, and various items have various color codes. Here's the red for the string literal there inside the quotes, and then the greenish color there for the console objects. Most of the commands that you're going to use here in C# are based on something called a .NET framework, which is a big collection of very handy objects that somebody in Microsoft has built and methods associated with those objects. So, for example, here for the console object, when I call the writeLine method, somebody has built this command that when you call that method, whatever you put inside the brackets can be passed out to the console and written to the console. Console.readLine is just another method made by somebody in Microsoft. What that's saying there is, I'm waiting for the user to input something on the keyboard. So there we go, we got hello world, the user can input something, then when you hit enter, the program flows to the end. Notice that follows our flow. We start the program, the message gets output to the screen, you can input data. Normally we just hit enter to end the flow, but as you can see in that case, I typed in some text and hit enter, and the flow went to the end. Okay, another thing I just like to point out is just the sets of braces which represent classes. So the first set of braces here is our namespace. I suppose for you at this point, the best way to define a namespace is a handy code organizer. Inside there we have the program class wrapped inside there, and the class for you at this time, again we'll learn more about classes later, is a good way of organizing your different methods. The first method that gets called when our code gets called is the main method, and in there you can see I'm calling the writeLine method for the console, I'm calling the readLine method for the console class there as well. And we're going to use our use case table here to generate some test cases. And in the case of this program, there's only one very basic test case where you get the output to the screen and you hit the enter key and just run through to the end of the flow. Some other programs might have a variety of test cases that you have to run, or numerous tests to test it thoroughly, but that's not the case here. But let's get used to the whole testing process. So I'll just call this test case 1. Displaying hello world. Then you have an expected outcome, which is the first extra column that you add to your use case table for your test cases. Then you record the actual outcome. So the expected outcome here is that hello world appears on the console, and user enters text, enter key. Okay, so there's my expected outcome. Let's run the program and see, is this the actual outcome? So here we can see the hello world runs, type in some text, hit enter, and the flow runs through to the end. So I've just appended a screenshot here to my test case as evidence of the successful test. So I'll evidence here that the expected outcome, or the actual outcome, matches the expected outcome, and the test is successful. In the real life scenario, sometimes some of these tests aren't successful, so the tester would hand back their test cases to the programmer in that case for the test to be resolved, so you can rerun the test case until you successfully passed all test cases and have the code ready for production. Now it's time for a knowledge check. So don't forget, it's good for you to pause and test yourself before I give you the answers here. So let's start with, see if you remember what happened during the design, build and test process that we undertook over this video here. So what happened when we tested? So the executable file that was built during the build process is checked to see, does it behave like you designed it? Now during the build process, the code is written and built, and that's the main part of the process there, where we went into the Visual Studio IDE and built the application. And then finally, the first part of the process is design, where the application is described, usually with the aid of a diagram, and we use the UML flow diagram to help us. Opening and closing curly braces define what? A function, a variable, a block of code, or a method. Okay, of course the answer here is a block of code. We come across numerous different types of blocks of code here. We had a block of code contained inside the main method. Then in there the main method was inside in the class, and you can have many different methods contained within a class. In this case here we only have one main method inside the program class, which is where you start executing the code, and that again is contained inside another block of code enclosed by your curly braces called the namespace. What is a method? So is it a means of organizing your code, a named block of code that you can call or execute by calling its name, or a way to restrict access to your code? So pause and have a think about that. A method is a named block of code that you can call or execute by calling its name. Examples of methods we've used here is the main method, which gets called straight away, the write line method for the console, which we use to write out hello world to the console when we passed in the hello world string to the write line method, and the read line method, which allowed the user interrupt or type in data to the console object. Okay, so those two different methods can be used under one console object there. What is the name of the default block of code that is executed when you set up a project in Visual Studio? So pause and see. And the answer here is main method. So the main or the main method. Either one of those should work for you. There we go, the default main is set up there, capital M, as you can see.